Hi guys, I am Victoria Belli, and today I'm going to be talking about CSS. I'm going to introduce you guys properly to CSS. So for today we're going to talk about CSS. We're going to talk about adding CSS to an HTML document. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of CSS like CSS comments, CSS syntax, CSS selectors, and CSS layouts. Of course, there are other basics too, and along the line as we go on through live classes and all that, we're going to touch other aspects. But for this video, this is what I'm going to be considering. Let's start right away. CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Just the way HTML is not a programming language, CSS also is not a programming language, and it is not a markup language either. CSS is a style sheet language. It is the language we use to style a web page. It actually describes how HTML elements are to be displayed on your web page. It is the act of web design. Now, when it comes to CSS, this is the way our CSS stuff look like, right? This is the way you had your CSS styles to your HTML documents, like to your HTML elements. This in total is called a rule set. This in total too is called a rule set. A rule set in CSS is made up of the selector, the declaration, the property value, and the property. In this rule set here, P is the selector. P is the selector here. We're selecting every element with the P tag. We're selecting every P element, right? Every paragraph, which is P. Color, column, red, semicolon. These together, all this together is a declaration. The color here is a property, and the value here is red. All this together is called the CSS rule set. This together is called the CSS rule set. In this case, we have div as the selector. This is an element selector. It is selecting all div tags, and it is applying the property border, giving it the value of 1 pixels, solid border, and then a red color. And then notice that it is in between curly braces. So this is the rule set in CSS. This is the way you apply your styles to your HTML document in CSS. Now, let's go here. Adding CSS to an HTML document. After writing CSS code, it's only normal you add it to the HTML document. If you don't add it to the HTML document or find a way to link it in the HTML document, it is as good as useless, because if it is not connected to the HTML document, it means that it will not be displayed. Now, I need you to know that when a browser reads a style sheet, it will format the HTML document according to the information in the style sheet. So anyhow you want your HTML document to appear, you have to put in the information in the style sheet. So if you want your HTML document to appear blue, then definitely you have to add in your style sheet that you want your background color to be blue, or you want the color of the text to be blue. And then you have to find a way to connect it in your HTML document so that the HTML document, when the HTML document is connected to the style sheet, the browser can read the information from the style sheet and then apply to the HTML document and then displays it for you. Now, there are 3 ways of inserting styles in an HTML document. We have the inline styles, the inline CSS, the internal CSS, and of course, the external CSS. Now, inline CSS allows you to add styles to specific elements, right? It allows you to add styles to specific elements. let's get a practical feel of what I'm saying. So let's go to our VX code. In the body tag, let me create an element. So let's say I want to use the image tag. I have two images here. I'm going to be using them to explain what I'm trying to say. So the image tag uses the source attribute. So the source attribute, let me use the first image, line 1. So it is appearing here. And then I'll use an alt text in case something goes wrong with my message, my image link. It's just going to display I am Victoria. Yeah. And let me give my image a width of 30%. I want my image to take 30% of the page. And the height of 500 pixels. And then I'm going to close my image tag. I'm going to open this using Live Server. And then I have my image displayed. Yeah. So now I'm going to use inline CSS here. I'm going to style my image in between the image tag. That is inline. You put it in the same line as your attribute, like the same line inside this bracket. That's inline. So you put it inside the tag. That is how inline CSS works. This image tag is an open-ended tag. So if you have another tag, let's say a P tag that has an opening and a closing tag. Let's say, I love me for who I am, right? If I want to add inline CSS, I'll add it in this first tag here, the opening tag. That's how I'll add the inline CSS and not the closing tag. The inline CSS uses the style attributes. So I want to style my image now. I'm going to come here and say style equals to, then I'll put my quotes, and let's say I want to give my image a style of a border of 5 pixels. It should be a solid border, and it should be a red colored border. I'm going to terminate with a semicolon. Yeah. So this is how to add the inline CSS. You add it in the tag. You add it in the tag. If it's an open-ended tag, you add it in just the tag. If it's a tag that has an opening and a closing, you add it to the opening tag. So now let's see what displays in our browser. We can now see that my image tag has a red border, just like what I wanted, right? So that's how to add the inline CSS. So the next one, we have the internal CSS and then the external CSS. So let's add internal CSS to our file. So the way internal CSS works, you add it to the head section. You add it to the head section, not outside the head section, to the head section, and you use the style tag in the head section. So this is how it is, the style tag, and then you put in your CSS declaration in between. That's your CSS rule, you put them in between, right, in the style tag that is in the head section. So let's say I want to style this. Once I put in the style tag, I just go directly and put in my declaration. So yeah, I want now I'm going to have to use a selector, right? I have to select the element I want, because now I have image elements here and I have P elements. There are different ways to select elements, but for now, let's use element selector. So let's say I want to select my element. I want to select the image element. So I'm going to just image, put a a curly brace, enter, and then put in my style declaration. So let's say border 5 pixels, solid. Let's use blue this time, solid blue. So let me just take this out. So we see that our internal CSS works well. So I'm going to cut this off. I'm going to paste it here, and then I'm going to put this in a comment. Shift question mark makes it a comment. So yeah, so let's go to our live server. Then we'll see it is applied. Internal CSS has been applied. Our border is now, the image border is now blue. So if we go back to our VS Code, right? So internal CSS in between the style tag and in the head section. Now, what if we don't want to use inline CSS and we don't want to use internal CSS? The last option we have is the external CSS. The external CSS allows you to link external style sheets from CSS files saved as a .file extension. So for external CSS, you have to save the file with a .css extension. If not, if you don't save it with a .css extension, it is no longer a style sheet, right? So I'll come here, I'll create a new file, and I'm going to name my file styles.css. And we're good to go. Now, when you come to the CSS file, you don't need a style tag anymore. It is a .css file, so automatically it understands everything. So you don't need to put it in a style tag, right? So you just start doing what you want to do. So let me call on p tag. Let me still use my image tag. Let me call on the image tag, open my curly braces, border 5 pixels, solid pink. Yeah. So now we have written our style.css, right? Let's go to our index.html. Now, I'm going to put all this in, I'm going to make it a comment. I want to comment it out. So control/ it's a comment now. Now let's look at our live server. So you can see nothing has happened to the image. I put in this the border to be blue, to be pink, but I can't see any pink design here. And that is because I did not link my CSS to my HTML. I did not link my CSS to my what? To my HTML. Once you have an external file, you have to find a way to link it in the HTML document. If not, the HTML document will not be able to connect to it. So to do that, we're going to use the link tag. Yeah. So we have link tag and anchor tag, right? The link tag is like this, right? It's an open-ended tag. It's an empty tag. It doesn't have a space for content. And then the anchor tag is like this. So what really is the difference between these two tags? The link tag, the anchor tag, first of all, doesn't work in the head section. So you can't use it to link your index.html to your CSS file. You use the link tag to link HTML document, to link HTML to other documents, right? You use the link tag. So the link tag is what we use at the head section to link the CSS to the HTML document. So let's take our link tag and do what we want to do. So the link tag has an attribute called rel. It tells the relationship between the two documents. What is the relationship between the style and the document? The CSS is a style sheet, right? It's a style sheet for the HTML document. So I'm going to just write style sheet here. And then it has an href attribute. So the href attribute, we're just going to put in the name of our CSS document, styles.css. Styles.css. Yeah. And now if we go to our page, we see that it is now applied. So you see, we now have the border as a pink colored border, right? So yeah. So when it comes to styles, we can add as much declarations as we want. We can add on that declaration. Let's say we want to make padding, image padding to be let's say 10 pixels, right? We'll come here, we can see our image now has a padding. Now have a padding, right? So you can add as much declarations as you want. Each line is a declaration. You terminate it with semicolon, right? And everything must be inside the curly brace. And then you must call the element you're applying it to. So that is it for inline CSS and internal CSS and external CSS. Now there's something called the cascading rule. The cascading rule, that is the order of precedence, right? Which one should the browser taking as the most important, something like that, right? Which one overrides each other? That's what the cascading rule is talking about. So inside the inline CSS, internal CSS, and external CSS, which one will the browser process first above any other one? Now let's see. So let's go to our index of HTML. To go here, so let's apply. Let's put in our styles back, right? Let me remove this from comments. Let me add in this style back to my internal and see what happens. So I've added the style. I've added an inline style here, inline CSS. Now let me uncomment this. Sorry, that's an error. This is internal style. So right now for this HTML doc, I have inline style, internal style, and then I still have the external style. And for the inline style, I'm setting my border to red. I'm setting my border to blue for the internal, and I'm setting my border to pink for the external. Now let's see what the HTML document process, because everything that I'm applying here is just to this one image tag, right? Let's see what's which one gets processed first. So I have red color, and the red color here is for the inline CSS. So inline CSS will always override the internal CSS and the external CSS, right? So anytime you have inline CSS and other kind of CSS like external or internal, it will always process give the inline CSS the ISM order of precedence, right? So now let me take this out. Let me take this out. So we know inline is higher than external, and inline is higher than external and internal, but in internal and external, which one is higher? Now let's go again. We've moved the style from the image tag. Now we have only internal CSS and external CSS. Let's check our browser, and we have blue. Wow. We'll go back here. We see that internal CSS gives us blue. So right inside the internal CSS and the external CSS, the internal CSS is processed first. So the internal CSS has a higher order of precedence than the external CSS. But what really is the best practice? Let me comment this out. What is the best practice in this three HTML this three type of CSS? Which one should we really use, right? So the best practice for styling HTML documents is the external style sheet. It lets you set CSS rules for several files, and this is very easy to update, right? So it lets you set rules for several files, and it's easier to update. So right, if I have like 4 different web pages and I have a single CSS document, I can just from here edit the 4 different web pages at once. If I have different images tag, for example, now index of HTML, when I used inline, I applied the property I want. I applied the style inside this line, Abby, and that style will only apply to this image tag. If I have on that image tag here, let's have an image tag here. I've added on that image. So I have 2 images here, right? I have 2 images here. Let me comment on this paragraph here. Comment out. So I have 2 images here, right? So these 3 images now, right? They are both image tag. If we're using the external CSS, you can see that from here, because I just called image and I added this, every image tag in my page, every image tag on my page, it just takes on this style that I've given it, right? Or if I'm not using inlines, if I'm not using external CSS, if I'm using inline CSS now, it means that I will now have to, let me just do this. If I'm using inline CSS now, it means that I will have to add in the style. I have to add in the style to every HTML, so every image tag. Because if I add it here now, only this one, go here. It's only affecting the one that I added it to. So if I'm using inline CSS, it's going to be very, very stressful. I'll now have to start adding this thing to all the image tag. And then it's going to make my work dirty, right? But it's going to make my work dirty. See now, I've applied it to the 2, right? It's working. But it's going to make my work dirty and it's going to give me much more stress, right? So the best thing to do is just to do what? Apply what you want to apply to the what? External CSS, and it just makes it easy to update things. You can just come here and easily update things. But just imagine the other scenario now. If I want to now start changing something in each image, I have to go to each image tag and be changing what I want to change. But yeah, I can just come here and just change what I want to change. I can just say, okay, I want it to be purple, and everything just goes sweetly. Oh, purple, yeah. I put my S back. And everything just runs smoothly, right? So that is it. So the best practice is using the external CSS. Internal CSS, now when you have so many things you want to design, you now start using internal CSS. You now start having long code here for CSS. There's no lines. So the best thing to do is to use the external CSS. If you must often use the inline CSS, it should be for minor modifications to your elements. Just before minor modifications, as much as possible, avoid it. Use the external CSS. That's the best practice. So that is it for applying CSS, HTML to CSS. So applying CSS to HTML. So now let's look at our slide. So the next thing we have here is CSS fundamentals, right? So CSS basics actually walks you through what you need to get started. There's so many things you need to get started, but I'm going to walk you through at least some of them. Something, the ones you at least you should know them, the basics, right? So the first thing is the CSS comments. The CSS comments. So comments are actually used to explain the codes and may help when you edit the source code at a later date. Comments are ignored by browser. So anything in between the comments tag is not actually displayed on the browser, and it helps you to understand your code. Sometimes let's say I built a website like 4 years ago, and I'm coming back to it to look at the source code. I may not remember everything I did. I may not remember what I was thinking of when I was doing what I was doing. Like I may not remember some things. It may now become very, very difficult to me to understand my code because I'll now have to start looking more. But if I have CSS comments, there, the comments are just there explaining the styles. It just becomes very, very easier to understand and read my code. It makes it more easier to edit my code anytime, like in the future, right? So let's look at how the CSS comments are. So if we come to this our CSS style, just for example, index of HTML now, you see we used comments here, right? This is how the comment for HTML is, but that's not the same way for CSS. The CSS comments now, let me put a comment here. The CSS comments, they're actually in between the slash. You put your comments in between the slash asterisk and then asterisk slash, right? this is it. So anything you type here now, anything you type here now will not be displayed on the body page, but it will just help you understand your code. For example, now I can put in a comment here. I can say this. Okay, I can just say styling my images. And anytime I come here, anytime I come back to my code, I just sit there, just know, oh, this place was for styling my images, right? So that's it. It helps you understand your code and helps anybody understand your code easily, right? So you can easily, if you want to put in the, if you want to come and make something in comments, you can easily do control question mark or control slash, and it becomes a comment, right? That is it for HTML CSS comments. Now let's go back to our slide. So the next thing we have is the CSS syntax. Now, when it comes to syntax, from the name syntax, just the way something should be, right? The way something should be written. Use the right syntax, that is, write it the good way, the right way. So CSS syntax, in CSS, when it comes to typing out our rule sets, there are certain things we need to know. We need to know that each rule set must be wrapped in a coily braces. It must be wrapped in coily braces. You must use a column to separate the property from its value or values in each declaration. You must use a semicolon to separate each declaration from the next one. Multiple CSS declarations are separated with semicolons, and declaration blocks are surrounded by coily braces. Now, looking at our code, this together is a CSS rule set, and this image tag is our selector, right? The image tag is our selector. The border here is a property. The padding here is a property. You have to always separate the padding as a property, and this is the property value. This one has multiple property values. These are the property values, right? And it has to be separated with a semicolon. This semicolon here, it has to be separated with a semicolon. The property and the value has to be separated with semicolon. And then you have to terminate each declaration. Sorry, the property and the value has to be separated with a colon. Then each declaration must be terminated with a semicolon, right? Now look at this border. This border has multiple values, 5 pixels, solid, top, and purple. Notice that I didn't put comma in between them. Just put it 5 pixels, solid, purple, and then you terminate with your semicolon. So this is the right syntax for CSS. If I don't put this semicolon now, I'm doing the wrong thing, right? If I don't put the semicolon, I'm still doing the wrong thing. See this one now. It's throwing error, right? Because see now CSS is confused. Are these two together? Is it a continuation? It's wrong, right? So you have to always add your semicolon. You have to separate each declaration using a semicolon. And then you can have multiple selectors, right? You can have multiple selectors. So I can say image, and I may want to apply this thing to my p tag too, right? So let's come here. So I may want to apply the same styles to my p tag. So if I want to apply the same styles to my p tag, that is, I want to select multiple elements, I have to separate it with a comma. Right? Image comma p. If not, if you don't separate it with a comma, you just do image p, it's going to misunderstand it as something else, right? So image comma p, meaning that please apply all these things here to image and also apply everything here to the p tag. So if you come here, you can see it's applied to the images and then it's applied to the p tag too. So let's go back to our VS Code. So, no, sorry, I'll slide. So the next thing we have is the CSS selectors. The CSS selectors. So CSS selectors are used to find or select the HTML elements you want to style. We can divide CSS selectors into 5 categories. We have simple selector, which selects elements based on name, ID, and class. We have the combinator selectors, which select elements based on a specific relationship between them. We have the pseudo class selectors. It selects elements based on a certain state. We have the pseudo element selectors. It selects and styles a part of an element. And then we have the attribute selector. It selects elements based on an attribute or attribute value. Yeah, so we have about 5 ways here to select. We have about eight ways, to select elements for styling in CSS. But we're going to talk about the basic tree. Let's talk about the basic tree types, which is the class selector, the ID selector, and the element selectors. They fall under the simple selectors. These other selectors, pseudo class, pseudo element, attribute selector, combinator selectors, everything will be discussed in the live class. But for now, let's talk about simple selectors. So, simple selectors, let's go to our Visual Studio codes. So yeah, so the first one, element selector, is what we'll be using since. We select our elements based on the name, right? Name of the element. We just said it's image tag P, image P, right? We select based on the name. You just put the name of the tag there and you style what you want to style. This is element selector. Then we have the other one. We have the CSS ID selector. So from the name CSS ID selector, from the name ID, just like your ID card, it implies that each ID of an element has to be unique. Just like in the real life too, every human has an ID card, right? Every human that has an ID card have an ID card that is unique. My ID card I can't have the same ID card number with you. It has to be unique, right? So that's the same thing. That's the same concept that is being applied here. In CSS, when you're using ID, each ID has to be unique for a particular element. If I come here and I want to add an ID to this place, I just put the ID attribute equals to, let's say I want to add ID 1. It will be very, very wrong for me to come here again and come and add ID equals to 1. It is no longer unique. It is no longer unique. It is no longer an ID, right? Because IDs are supposed to be unique. It is wrong to do it this way, right? So IDs are supposed to be unique. So let's give this one an ID of 2, right? So IDs, you can use ID to pick a particular element because after all, that particular element will have that ID value. So I can start using ID. I come here now and I start want to start this using p tag. I want to start using my ID. I have to start with the hash symbol, right? So you put the hash symbol and you put the value of the ID, hash 1, right? So let's see, look at our browser. We have picked this element using the ID. This element has an ID of 1, and now we're applying the styles are being applied to it. It has a padding of 10 pixels and a purple colored border. So if I come here again, I come here and I want to say, okay, I want this to be applied to 2. If I go here, it's applied to this one. So you can select elements based on the ID. And if you want to use the ID, you have to start with an hash, then the ID name. Now, let's go to our index.html. Let's talk about the class selector. So from the name class, it implies that it's not unique, right? Because for example, now, when we were in JS1 or when you were in SS1, in your class, it was not only that was in SS1 now, we had different people in SS1. When I was in SS1, I had classmates, right? So we're all in the same class, meaning that different people can have the same class. So the same thing with CSS. Different tags can have the same class. They can all belong to a particular class. So if I come here, I can add a class. Now note, an image and an element can have both ID and class. It is normal. Because after all, me now, when I was in JS1, I was in JS1, a class, right? And I still had my ID card. So I had an ID card and I was in JS1 class, right? So an element too can still take in ID class. So let's say class equals to, let's say class equals to picture. So I can still come here and give this second image a class equals to picture. So what this means is that anything I apply to this class picture will be applied to any element that is carrying this class. So if I come here now, I can now style with my class. So style with class, you have to use the full stop, and then you put the class name. So class picture. Class picture. So class picture now is going to be applied. This style now is going to be applied to every HTML document, every HTML element that has the class picture. So you see it is being applied to this too because this one has a class picture, one has a class of picture too. So it has been applied to it. So that is how to use the ID selector, the class selector, and the element selector. Now, let's talk a bit about HTML layouts. Let's go to our slides. HTML layout, CSS layouts. I'm always making a mistake. CSS layouts, right? So, after understanding the basics of CSS, it is good for you to learn how to style and manipulate boxes that your content sits inside, right? You have to, if you have learned CSS, you have learned HTML, at least you should be able to manipulate the way your web page looks like, right? CSS layouts is all about correctly arranging your boxes in relation to the viewport as well as to another. So you have to learn to arrange your boxes in your page in relation to the viewports, the way people see it, like, and in relation to one another, right? So that is what CSS layout is all about. All these pages we have, for example, my portfolio, the way my website is, right? The layout, my footer, my everything, all these things are under CSS layout. The way you arrange your page to make it look very, very fine. So there are different layouts. We have layout templates online. So right, everything is under is under layout, CSS layout. So when it comes to CSS layout, there's 3 categories, right? There are 3 categories in which you can lay out your page. The first one is the block and inline, the second one is the grid, and the third one is flexbox. I'm sure many of you have heard about grid and flexbox before, but I'm not going to be talking about I'm not going to be going in depth in this video, right? This CSS layout will be taken care of properly during a live section. Yeah. So recall when I was talking, I mentioned manipulating the boxes that your content sits inside. That is, I was calling my I was saying that our content sits inside a box, right? So that brings us to what we call CSS box model. So CSS box model, in CSS box model, it sees every HTML element as a box on the web page, right? And then we now design based on the fact that we're looking at the elements as a box. Now that CSS box model, I'm going to explain it properly in another video. You can always check out the Zuri YouTube page for videos on for the video and other videos too, to learn more about front-end development and other kind of developments, right? So thank you for listening. I am Victoria Nibeli once again. We introduced CSS, and to an extent I expect you all to at least feel how do I put it? I expect you all to be ready to build sweet and beautiful websites, right? Yeah, so this tutorial again is under the Zurich training, and it's sponsored by Ingressive for Good in partnership with Zurich. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this has added to your wealth of knowledge. Thank you. Bye.